Kalimera, kalispera, kalinichta, no matter where in this wild, wacky, and sometimes wonderful world you might be. Thank you for making the Highbury Squad part of your day. We're a few hours late, but I told you it would be worth the wait. Let's rock and roll, squaddies.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform. Please stand clear of the discussion doors. The next stop is Highbury Squad.
Keep messaging me and you keep asking me, when's Ben coming back? Well, he's here. He's back, one of your favorites, and probably, along with 2 or 3 others, one of the hardest working men in media right now, Mr. Ben Jacobs.
How are you? Great to see you.
You've grown a beard since the last time we saw you.
You found a fantastic summer hat that somehow matches that red bow tie.
You know, I try. I got this on the Amalfi Coast when I was on holiday with Tony a couple of years ago, and I love this hat. It's my favorite, and it does match the old Dickie bow, doesn't it? So yeah. Ben, are you getting any sleep? Any sleep?
Not so much. Today, I would say, has been one of the craziest individual days of work, of stories, because we've had Benjamin Sesko, Manchester United. I know none of this is really Arsenal related.
No, they want to know it all. Yeah.
Had reports in Germany about Isak and personal terms, although that's actually not my understanding, but still involves a lot of power and effort and time and calls. But I'm not updating anything new on Isak just yet. And then, of course, this evening, Jorrel Hato to Chelsea, which was expected, but there's an agreement in principle there as well. So crazy, crazy day. And from Arsenal's point of view, they're probably sitting back quite calm, thinking we've got a number 9, we've got Zubimendi, we've got Noni Madueke, we've got Norgard, we've got Kepa, we've got Mascara. Pretty much all about that central midfielder and some outgoings now. So I don't think Arsenal will be as busy as other clubs, but that's partially because these last 2 weeks have been extremely well executed. And as a consequence, come the beginning of the Premier League season, I think Andrea Berta and Mikel Arteta will be very content.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And it's funny because we also start talking to ourselves as fans and saying, well, maybe they've left the most complicated transfer for the very end, the icing on the transfer cake, Ben. You've been talking, and by the way, a round of applause for Ben because, you know, we've been enjoying talking to you for the last couple of seasons now, but it feels like this summer transfer window, you're smashing it. And it's really great to see one of media's real good guys. So to see you flourish the way you are. And we're so grateful for your time. And you've been a really good friend of the show now for a couple of years. And you told us about a lot of those deals that have happened and kept us well informed. And the icing on the cake, Ben, give us the good news, would be this fella right here. For those listening on our audio platforms, Apple and Spotify, we are showing a picture of Eze.
Yeah, I think what makes me laugh a little bit is that they've somehow gone for 2 targets with complicated finger celebrations. And it was hard enough for me to do this, let alone whatever that sort of T shape is with Eberechi Eze. And I'm probably too old to even understand what it means. But this is a target that, as I broke, has been on Arsenal's radar for quite some time. Then I reported that a club-to-club contact was expected. That's now happened. And I think we went into this last time. The clause itself, almost £68 million, is really complicated because you have to go through the front door. I know that might sound like an obvious thing to say, but given the Morgan Gibbs-White saga, that's the point here, that you only learn about the terms of the clause, its specifics, its complexities, if you're engaged directly with Crystal Palace. It's not the kind of thing that you can just feel is triggerable and is preferable to a potential buyer. So you go through the back door and say, we're not negotiating with you, we're taking the clause. You need to understand this is a clause framed to benefit Crystal Palace, framed to benefit Eberechi Eze's former clubs, and framed to benefit, like with Michael Olise, Eberechi Eze, because the player actually gets a commission or a cut if the clause is triggered too. In addition to that, as I think the excellent insider account Hand of Arsenal broke, and Ed Aarons as well in The Guardian, 35 million needs to be paid in a lump sum. So essentially the payment terms on the clause are split over 2 years, but half of that clause needs to be paid up front. So it isn't really in Arsenal's interest to just go ahead and trigger this clause, which is why, as I've reported before, my expectation is a bid will go in and it'll be under the clause or ultimately may match the clause, but look for different payment terms. And that's kind of where we're at the moment. And once again, Eberechi Eze is viewed as a number 10, much like the number on the back there. So this isn't about left wing only, but if they make the signing, they do know that he can play on that left-hand side. There will need to be some form of outgoings, less because of PSR. Arsenal are compliant and we've entered into a new financial year. More down to the fact that wages are not annual. So you need to clear the wage space because it's a longer term commitment for both your incomings and existing players. And squad chemistry is a factor as well, because Ethan Nwaneri, new deal, also could get some time through the centre. Eze could go number 10 or to the left. Martinelli, Trossard, left. Noni Madueke, right or left. And with Saka, your starting right-sided winger, Madueke will be thinking left side too. So I still think we're back to where we were before. It's not to say that Eze couldn't happen and then an outgoing. I don't think they have to wait for a sort of out, one in. But the point here is wage chemistry, squad chemistry. There will be a need for an outgoing, given the fact Madueke will expect time on the left. Eze may need time on the left on occasion. And as a consequence, we're back to that extreme, like I said before, of negotiating with confidence around extending players like Martinelli or Trossard. But if the right offers come in, pivoting to the polar opposite, with likely very limited middle ground. So if the window shuts and Martinelli, Trossard is still there, I think Arsenal will advance those contract talks to protect their value and lock them down. But it's not to say in the next 5 weeks that one of them isn't dispensable. And this might inform whether they actually get Eze over the line and if they ultimately meet Crystal Palace's valuation. So that's where we're at. I'm not led to believe that Arsenal are going to enter the race yet for Xavi Simons. We know it's Chelsea that are talking on the player side and about to make their first bid. Definitely a player on the radar of Arsenal, but not a player that they're working on in the same kind of way of club-to-club talks as with Eberechi Eze. So all signs are Eze is the number one target, and now we have to wait and see whether it's feasible, because I get the sense that Crystal Palace will not be easy to deal with.
Ben, do you, Yasu Yannis? I have to say hi to Yannis because he's listening from the motherland in Cyprus, and let us know where in the world you are. And if you have a question for Ben, after I've asked 2 or 3, I'm going to hand it over to you guys. So put a Q ahead of it. And I promised you last time when Ben came on, this time you guys would get more questions in. So make sure you do that tonight. Ben, regarding Eze himself and his people, the amount of communication with the club, personal terms, as far as you're aware, none of that has come to fruition.
Well, I think personal terms are not a problem with Eze. So although not 100% agreed, it comes down to that key point, because when Chelsea came for Michael Olise, they agreed terms with the player and then were told they triggered the clause in the wrong way and it was invalid. They walked away. Olise signed a new deal. This situation is sensitive because although you can approach the player side and Palace are aware, it's very important before you get to the point of any full agreement or escalation that you understand how this clause is triggered. So Arsenal have very intentionally held talks with the Eze camp because they know there is buy-in. He wants the move to Arsenal. So personal terms are not something that you would finalise before now going to Crystal Palace. So this is a step of protocol by Arsenal, knowing, first of all, when the right time was to approach Crystal Palace, because a week or so ago, they were dealing with the fallout and the appeal of their demotion to the UEFA Conference League. Now they're waiting for a CAS hearing that takes place on August the 8th. So there's a kind of lull. And I think the correct approach for this transfer is to go absolutely and categorically by the book to make sure there isn't a repeat of that Olise or a Morgan Gibbs-White type situation. And that will be the case even if Arsenal choose not to start with saying they're going to trigger the clause. And that's why I think there's an element of caution and making sure they protect an already strong relationship with Crystal Palace. In addition to that, another complication in all of this is Palace's own window. Oliver Glasner said today that they haven't been as active as he would have hoped. Mark Gay is expected to depart. There was an offer rejected today for Jean-Philippe Mateta. And then you have interest in Adam Wharton too. So Arsenal will be aware that Crystal Palace's desire to do business below the clause may actually come later in the window when they've been a bit more active in the market or when they can find a replacement. So this might still be a bit of a patient saga, because the only way you do this deal quickly is by knocking on Crystal Palace's door with player buy-in and saying, we're triggering the clause, let us speak to the player. If that happened, Eberechi Eze would, according to my information, say yes to Arsenal, and the deal could be done very quickly. But if Arsenal want to go outside of the clause, they may have to respect the fact that, like with Newcastle finding Isak replacements, there are some steps before they can actually make that final bid or get an agreement below the release clause. So I think this is a saga Arsenal feel is in their control, but it may be one that still takes a bit of time.
Okay. Let's start off with some of your questions that riff off the Eze and kind of latter part of the window interest. This is from Harish. Ben, David Ornstein from the start of the window mentioned Arsenal were monitoring Anthony Gordon. Is there anything you know in this regard, especially with the window Newcastle are having? Could you see something like this happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've said many times that Anthony Gordon is on the radar of both Arsenal and Liverpool. So that information is legit, according to sources that I speak to sign any left-sided attacker, a specialist winger, at the magnitude financially that would be required to pull off a Gordon or a Rodrygo, these kind of players, an outgoing would be needed first. And I actually think we're now in a scenario where it will be an attacking midfielder or a left winger, regardless of what happens with either Leandro Trossard or Gabriel Martinelli. And the reason for that is because if it's Eze or even Xavi Simons, despite the fact that Arsenal haven't really opened formal talks yet, both of these players can go 8, 10 or wide left. And as a result, if you add up one of Martinelli or Trossard or both staying, plus Noni Madueke, Arsenal will feel quite covered. So there was a situation, maybe we spoke about this in the early part of the window, where it could have been a right winger, an attacking midfielder, a left winger and a number 9. Now I think it's only 3 of those 4, simply because of the versatility of who they've brought through the door. Noni Madueke feels that he's been signed to play right or left. Eberechi Eze prefers through the centre and is viewed as a 10 by Arsenal, but can play on the left-hand side. And then one of Martinelli and Trossard at a minimum is expected to stay, because I don't see both of them being outgoings this window. If it's both, it completely shuts the door to even a slim percentage chance of a left winger. If it's one, I still think Arsenal would feel covered if they got Eberechi Eze. So the only way I think Arsenal could sign a Gordon, or obviously in a dream world a Rodrygo, but I think that saga has been a bit overblown, not because they don't love the player, but it's such an expensive deal. Unless the price drops and significantly, which is not beyond the realms of possibility, but as of now, the deal is too expensive. So something dramatic would have to change in the coming weeks. But the only way I think they could go down that route, Gordon, Rodrygo, or anyone else that is in that profile, is if they pivot from Eze. So they decide actually that their plan is Declan Rice can take on a more advanced role because Zubimendi is a specialist 6. Martin Odegaard is still there. Ethan Nwaneri can obviously play in a more central role. And you never know, if Victor Gyokeres is leading the line, then does Kai Havertz even get the opportunity to play as a second striker or a 10? And all of these permutations will be going through their minds. So if it's Eze, I don't see a box office left winger. If it is an Eze and there was an outgoing, maybe they decide, okay, we're going to go for a left winger and not a number 10 anymore, and give Nwaneri the opportunity to deputise for Saka along with Madueke, or go and play as a number 10. So this is why pre-season is important, and this is where Mikel Arteta really comes in, because this is a Berta window. It's his timeline, it's his style, it's different to under Edu or Jason Atu, but Arteta is the constant, and he's probably saying, just give me a week or 2 of pre-season to input and work out exactly the kind of profile we need. But I don't see it being Eze and Rodrygo, Eze and Gordon. I don't actually see it being now Rodrygo at all, but that appreciation for Gordon is definitely genuine.
Okay. Great answer. And Dean, I'm sure that answers your question. So many Rodrygo questions. John, I'm sure that answers your question as well on Rodrygo. Let's shift gears a little bit from Rodrygo. I too, Ben, at the beginning, it was kind of like one of those Alexis Sanchez type signings. Seems the player's undecided. I felt a Bayern Munich might be the answer. Now they've got Luis Diaz. Then there was Chelsea, but you're talking about other connections with Chelsea. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with him. Right. There's a few other questions. And Dean, by the way, thank you for your question too. Another one about Rodrygo. Okay, so let's switch gears, Ugo Kochu here. And there's a few of them about Zinchenko. In terms of wages, Ben mentioned wages. If we sell Zinchenko and other fringe players and get Eze and then sell Trossard to get another left winger, is that possible? Ben talked a little bit about wage and shifting gears a little bit. Zinchenko, another one of those players, Ben, that everyone feels that, is probably on his way out. What do you know about Zinny?
Well, I think Oleksandr Zinchenko could be an exit. And that's been the case, by the way, since June, when the Sun ran a story stating that Fulham had made an approach. I ran a story today actually about Anthony Robinson and how the left back at Fulham is being chased by Al Nassr. So it's important to put those two stories together and understand there may be a possibility if Fulham lose a left back that they enter the race for Oleksandr Zinchenko. And the reason for that is because the June approach they made to the player pitched that he could come, be a starting left back and get minutes in the Premier League. And Zinchenko at that point told Fulham, even though there is other interest from Europe's big five leagues, that he likes the idea of staying in London. So if we put two and two together, there is a scenario where the four makes Anthony Robinson goes, Al Nassr are the club in Saudi pushing. I have no intel or knowledge yet as to whether Robinson wants to go to Saudi. But clearly, if he departs, Fulham will have to ramp up their efforts for a left back. Then we come back to the exclusive that was run in the Sun, where Zinchenko was approached. And I've backed that up at my end. I'm not aware of anything developing yet in terms of a new bid or approach or anything of that nature. We're still at very early and formative stages. But the player talks took place in June. And if Robinson goes, this is a story that could develop. It was kind of interesting today because it got presented naturally as far as the Arsenal fans are concerned, of Fulham going to bid for Zinchenko, Fulham making fresh approach. But I think it's really key to understand the context. I actually reported it on Gimme Sports Market Madness podcast, which was really more about Robinson and Saudi and Fulham having budget. And if they need to use it on a starting left back, Zinchenko, potentially between 10 and 15 million, may be a player having made an approach in June that they moved for. Nothing more than that at this stage. There is other interest in Zinchenko, I'm told, from Turkey, from Saudi Arabia, and even from Italy as well. So it's very early stages. And key will be Fulham's budget, because right now they would prefer Robinson to stay. And if he does, I think they're going to put their funds predominantly around the midfield. So Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall is one example. Reece Nelson is another that we know they're finalising. So there's a real pattern here of Fulham trying to find attackers, finding a versatile eight, finding a winger. We know prior to Nelson, they also made an inquiry over Raheem Sterling. That's their number one priority at the moment. Nelson formalised, and then possibly an 8 or a 10. From there, we'll see if they've got the budget and the desire, contingent on Robinson, to pivot back to left back. And if they do, then Oleksandr Zinchenko could be one to watch.
I'm a huge fan of Robinson. I've covered him for here in the States, the US men's national team. And if there's been a player growth, I think in the last 2 years in the Premier League, it's him. And there are some listeners saying, I wouldn't mind Robinson at Arsenal, with Calafiori being very injury prone. Having a good backup to Miles Lewis-Skelly, and you want to be careful about him. I rate him, and I'd be surprised if he went to Saudi at this point. But, you and I continue to talk about Saudi and the growth and how players kind of view that, not only from a fiscal perspective, but also, in terms of maybe having other opportunities that come their way too. And Saeed here has a question that links a little bit to Saudi, and you know this more than anyone, Ben. you talked about, he's saying, Ben, you mentioned on a Saudi focused spaces that Odegaard would be open to a Saudi move in the future. Do you think that's an added reason why Arsenal is pursuing Eze?
Yeah, I think the Odegaard situation is quiet as far as I'm aware. He's still naturally highly valued. He wears the captain's armband. There's no reason to think that an Eze arrival will necessarily provoke anything imminent in terms of an Odegaard exit. I can tell you that since 2023, the same with Son, the Saudi side have been pushing for these kind of players, and they tend to approach them directly and quite blindly with non-binding offers to garner attention and turn heads, but it doesn't mean that those conversations lead anywhere, at least not imminently. So if Saudi can get Martin Odegaard at any point this year, next year, before he's 35 years of age, he is a player of interest for sure. But I don't think Arsenal will entertain anything now. And I think Saudi deal makers know that quite clearly. There's also been interest in Odegaard from MLS, specifically this summer, partially because the clubs realise in the build-up to a World Cup, it's a good time to approach players. And naturally for Odegaard, he still knows he can play at the top level. So he's not really entertained MLS or Saudi yet. But I think it quite helpful for these projects to have the conversations now. And that was the same, by the way, with Cincinnati and ultimately Vancouver, who have got Thomas Muller. The conversations leading to Cincinnati taking Thomas Muller's discovery rights and now Vancouver buying them off Cincinnati, another exclusive I broke a couple of days ago, and Muller going to Canada. It may think to some people it manifests now, but actually those conversations began about 2 years ago once people realized that Muller is planning for his next step. So it can be simultaneously true that Martin Odegaard holds a conversation and yet has zero interest in leaving Arsenal now. Because like all of us, when we save up for things, when we plan for our future, it can be helpful, especially with a short span as a footballer, to start thinking 2-3 years ahead and firmly understanding what options you may have. And that's where we're at with Odegaard. I think internally at Arsenal, there's a fascinating conundrum of Zubimendi and how that influences Rice and then Eze and Nwaneri and Odegaard, if Eze, of course, comes off, and who gains less minutes or whose role changes within this formation. And like I said before, it could even be Havertz as well, because if Gyokeres is starting every week, is Havertz a backup, or is there a scenario where Havertz can play behind Gyokeres too? So there's a lot of versatile players, and there's a lot of welcome selection headaches for Mikel Arteta as a result. But even if Martin Odegaard had diminished minutes because of a potential arrival of Eberechi Eze, I'm not sure that indicates an exit imminently, because I think Arsenal would shut down any offers at this stage for Odegaard. But in a year's time, let's wait and see the knock-on effect of this summer and Arsenal's attackers.
Yeah, I would. It was an interesting question, and you're right in the sense that sometimes, fans think things happen overnight, and a lot of the times they just don't. And because there was a time where Thomas Muller was being attached to LAFC as well, and it's and Griezmann has been, if he ever leaves Atletico and he joins LAFC like in a few weeks, that has been ongoing for a couple of years as well. So yeah, a lot goes into it. An interesting one for you from Ian. There was the connection. I think we're all surprised about the interest in Jesus. There was the story about Berta wanting maybe to move him on, get him off the wage bill. Ben, what's your take on the Jesus Flamengo stories and where he might be playing his football this coming season at the Emirates or elsewhere?
Although I don't sense Jesus is unsellable, and we might get, therefore, some kind of offer or some kind of push towards an exit in this window. I'm not aware of these links to Brazil or Tottenham, as some have said as well. I think it's an internal conversation and discussion about, could they, at the right price, sell Gabi Jesus, knowing that you've got Gyokeres and you've got Havertz, and Jesus is a bit of a Swiss Army knife, but now you've got the Swiss Army knife of Madueke right and left. You might have the Swiss Army knife of Eberechi Eze, left, right, or centre, 8-10 second striker. So Gabi Jesus is worth, perhaps, as a squad player and even a starter, is more called into question now, due to the fact that Victor Gyokeres has arrived as the lead striker. Fit Bukayo Saka plays on the right-hand side, and there's several other options in the attack too. So there could be a possibility of a Gabriel Jesus exit. But I had the notion of talks with Flamengo downplayed by sources. I had the idea of a switch across North London dismissed. Tottenham's priority is not necessarily to find a Jesus-type player, even in the absence of Morgan Gibbs-White joining. I think at the moment they're looking actually for a right-sided attacker that is winger by name and forward by nature. And some would say Jesus can go out wide and still have offensive output. But I think they're really looking for somebody with a proven fitness and scoring record that can be catapulted straight in as a source of goals, which is where their inquiry for Yohan Wissa came from. Or alternatively, they're going to go young and homegrown, and Jesus doesn't tick that box. And this is where Tottenham's interest in Tyler Dibbling comes from. More importantly, Tottenham need a 6, and that will be a big area of emphasis, I think, in the coming weeks. So add all of that up, plus the arrival of Mohamed Kudus and Dominic Solanke leading the line. And I don't think there's a situation where Spurs would see a fit for Gabriel Jesus, even if there was to be some business to be done between the two clubs. From Arsenal's point of view, there's probably a logic as well, regardless of the amazing window that they've had so far. If you're going to let Jesus go, send him off to a non-Premier League rival just in case. I don't think it'll be an absolute deal breaker at the right offer, in the same way that West Ham sold Kudus to Spurs. But I think if there was to be an exit, my gut feeling is don't sell him to a Premier League rival, and that might be the starting point. Or if you are to sell to a Premier League rival, it's a higher price compared to doing something abroad. So do I think Gabriel Jesus is done at Arsenal? Not necessarily. Do I think he's open to Brazil in some capacity? Maybe. Is there a chance that Saudi come calling? Yes. Turkish interest too. Besiktas was the club I was told had an internal inquiry about Gabriel Jesus to decide if he was the kind of player that might be available. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is there, remember? And that was back in May, but I'm not aware that anything moved or advanced on it. So there are a few moving parts and things developing with Gabriel Jesus, but I think the notion that there's actually clubs at the table, or that Arsenal have got a price, or that Arsenal are already determining his future, to me, asking around, that feels a bit premature.
Okay. I don't it's really sad in some ways, because a bit like Tomiyasu, I don't factor Jesus into the squad these days because he's just been so unavailable. But would always wish a player like that who helped reignite Arsenal 2.0 when he first arrived from Manchester City, no doubt. Essie and David and Ian, I hope that answers your question about Jesus. Now, I'm going to try and couple these all together for you, because there's a few, this will be much to the disdain of my good friend Tom Canton. Dean Mallon and a few others are asking about Rafael Leao, as is Elliot Roberts. And Roshan is also asking, is there potential backup from Simons if Eze proves not to happen? It's all kind of like maybe an Elliot again asking about Leao. What's your take on the backups, if the links to the Milan player are, fact or myth?
Yeah, I've no idea who broke the Leao story. I have nothing to add on it. I've not heard from any sources that I've asked, and full respect to others, of course, in their reporting. But people I've asked have never mentioned the name Rafael Leao and Arsenal. So I'm not aware of anything in that. I'd heard Spurs and Rafael Leao. And the thing about Leao is he's never wanted to leave Milan. And the only reason why we're hearing a bit of suggestions of a glimmer of hope to those that have looked at Leao is because Milan's financial situation needs money, and Milan unthinkably didn't get any European football. So a Leao who is ambitious, that has always been attached to Milan, that has always downplayed any links away, is now presented with an opportunity where several clubs around the world can give him Champions League football and more money than he's on at Milan. And he has to make a decision, if those inquiries turn into anything concrete, as to whether he wants to stick with this project or finally make a move away. And it feels like 2023, if not 2022 onwards, we've heard Leao linked with everyone. Chelsea looked at him in the first window under Todd Boehly, for example. But Leao's always rebuffed the advances. He reminds me a bit of Lautaro Martinez, who's at Inter, who again seems to be linked away constantly, but the player just loves it where he is, and it becomes quite difficult to prize him away. But if there is a window to get Leao, this might be the summer because of Milan's financial situation. But I have heard zero Arsenal people that I speak to even mention Leao, other than the fact that, of course, he's one of the world's best players in that position. I still think, even having prefaced that answer with Milan and their finances, you would be looking at a 80 to 100 million euros deal as a ballpark. And I don't think that Arsenal or Spurs will engage at that number. But I don't think Leao and Arsenal is anything to get excited about. It's one of those where I don't want to shout down others reporting. I'm not even sure where the link has come from, to be perfectly honest with you. But a few people have asked me in the last 7 days, and I haven't got any indication that he's been discussed at Arsenal or he's on an Arsenal list. And once again, I come back to what I said before, that were they to add a left winger, it might be in place of a number 10, or if they add Eberechi Eze or an equivalent in that position, they may feel quite well covered on the left-hand side. So if they were to go left wing and attacking midfield, you would think that that left winger might be younger, might be staggered in order to give them a more patient development, to allow for Trossard, Martinelli, or one of them to stay, to allow Noni Madueke to feel happy. And then from there, whoever comes in might be more one for the future. And I know that Arsenal were one of the clubs, along with Liverpool, and we know it's Everton that actually placed a bid in the end. But Malik Fofana was the name in that category that I'd heard as far as Arsenal were concerned. Player would love to go and play somewhere with Champions League football, so it's by no means done as far as Everton are concerned. So let's see if anything develops there with any other Premier League clubs. But I have to say, at the moment, I'm told it's quite quiet on the left wing front because, again, their focus is on Eze. He can play on the left-hand side. They've got Madueke. He can play on the left-hand side. And they already also have Martinelli and Trossard. So there feels less urgency about adding a left winger, even though I can understand why fans wanting to enjoy this crazy window are just saying, why can't we have signing after signing after signing? But the reality is, if Eze comes in for incomings, that might be the end of the window.
And I think most Arsenal fans would be happy with that, especially after scoring gyokeres. Right, before we get on to, we got Ben for another 15 minutes here. Before we get on to some of the other Premier League teams, we want to ask him about that too. I've got a question for you from Gooner, Russ and Saeed. They're asking similarly, why have we been so poor at selling in windows? Hopefully it improves with Andrea Berta. And Saeed, similar question for you. Ben, why do you think Arsenal are perceived to be a poor selling club compared to Liverpool and Chelsea? And of course, he mentions players in there like Kwanzaa, Diaz, Felix. It's crazy how much money Felix has gone for again. Madueke and that goalkeeper. Ben, what's your take on this? Because there is some legitimacy to it. We are hoping it's going to change with Berta. There's rumours about Vieira going, Reece Nelson to Fulham, Zinni. Hopefully Kivior will stay. There was talk about him, whether it's Trossard or Martinelli. A lot of fans would like to see both of them stay. Some want us to sell to reinvest. But what is it? What's wrong with us culturally on the selling front?
Yeah, I think some of it is just backing and belief as far as the academy is concerned. So bringing players up, keeping them as part of the first team squad, developing them, and not wanting the names that they actually bring through to the first team to leave. So keeping a stable group, keeping a small squad size. And as a consequence, you get a scenario where you're not churning through your academy or young players on the periphery of the first team because you're backing them to just develop. And this is why we saw a big push under Mikel Arteta and Edu to renew several players rather than sell them. If they wanted to cash in on Saliba, particularly when he first returned after the loan and his pathway and his game time wasn't clear, they could have got a massive fee. If they want to sell Gabriel Magalhaes, they could have done to Saudi Arabia for crazy kind of money. But there's a backing to keep players because they sign them or they develop them. Whereas I think Chelsea overstock a bit more and as a consequence can always turn a profit. Arsenal are dealing with maybe a smaller pool of players. So that's maybe one factor. And then the other thing is just that over time, you maybe need a situation. I think we've got some friction or some fuzzing here. I don't know if that's my end. I don't know if we've still got distortion. Has the feed packed in? Hopefully, we've managed to fix it now. Let me know if you can still hear me. I think it might be your end. If the chat maybe tells me if they can still hear me clearly, then I'll continue. And if not, I'll just remain silent, which some people will say is a good thing anyway. I think it might be at your end. So apparently the chat can hear me, so I'll continue my answer and you sort your gremlins out, which have obviously arrived intentionally in order to ruin an answer about Arsenal's finances, presumably because these gremlins actually think that Arsenal's outgoings have been okay. So what I was going to say is if you kind of look at the departures 24-25, you had Emil Smith-Rowe, 30 million euros, Eddie Nketiah, 30 million euros. Aaron Ramsdale was a pretty good fee at 20 million euros as well. So they have had sales. Balogun, I think, wasn't bad at 30 million either, because that was in a market when very few people were spending big. But I think generally Arsenal have been a buying club, and they've bought for the now and the future. And when you invest big money, it's sometimes hard to therefore turn a profit because you're giving them those first team opportunities, and they've backed their academy as well. So maybe there's a scenario where if you bring in a Kai Havertz type fee, you're always going to struggle to kind of turn that into anything more than you paid. But that was because they really wanted the player for the now. If you sign a Jorginho, there's always a danger that that player leaves, and again, you don't make a profit. But I think we need to look at the value that was given by these players before they left. And that's very underrated because people just look at what you paid and what you sold them for. But what did they actually do at the football club? So if Leandro Trossard is sold for a number that is not as high as Arsenal wanted, he still had a really good impact and has been a very underrated signing for Arsenal. So I think they'll define value not just in financial terms. They'll look at trying to put a less quantifiable number or cost onto actually what these players have done before they depart. And this is kind of where we're at the moment, I think, with Arsenal. So hopefully people heard that anyway, because I know we've got some interference. And
Ben,
hopefully you've been able to change your mic or your camera and we plow on.
I'm so sorry. I have no idea what happened there. My system just totally took a tank, and I do apologize. But thanks for carrying on and talking to the squaddies. I don't know what I missed, but I'm sure you covered everything.
I did my best. I thought it was me to begin with. And
no, it wasn't you. It was
luckily,
me.
The gremlins are your end.
Everything just started melting down completely. I have no idea what happened. I know we've only got you for a few more minutes. So before, I think we've covered Arsenal pretty well. And I wanted to ask you about Isak and Sesko. Sesko, I can totally see maybe this horrible narrative brewing next season if he does join Manchester United or Newcastle. Gyokeres versus Sesko. And also Liverpool, if they do sign Isak, that will be a pretty prolific window. What's your update on those players?
The players, sorry, I think you cut out. Well, which ones?
On Gyokeres, on Sesko and Isak.
Yeah, I think Benjamin Sesko away from Arsenal is a fascinating situation because Manchester United have formally entered the race. They're now prioritising him over Ollie Watkins. It's been driven by Christopher Vivell, as I broke earlier today. And now they have to wait for the player to pick between Man United and Newcastle and then hope with that player buy-in, whichever club gets it, they're able to drive down the price. Because my understanding is that Leipzig still value Benjamin Sesko at 75 million euros plus add-ons. So this is still an 80 million euros deal or more. And the price Man United and Newcastle want to do the deal for is 70 million euros. So there's a 10 to 15 million euros gulf in valuation between Manchester United and Newcastle and Leipzig. And the only thing that's really going to change is if the player picks where he wants to go, and then as the window starts to close, that price drops. Price may not drop if Xavi Simons goes to Chelsea, because then Leipzig have brought in money. But key to all of this is Leipzig need the money because they're heading into a season without European football. And the tough part for Arsenal was they were looking at Sesko early in the window. So Leipzig just repeated what they're repeating now to Manchester United and Newcastle, that this is an 80 million plus euros deal with 75 million euros in add-ons. Newcastle, I think, might pay that. So if Sesko picks Newcastle, or Sesko realizes Man U can't get anywhere near, that's the hope for Newcastle United, that essentially they will have the financial power that Man United don't, which is why they're still in the race. But I suspect what may happen is Sesko may say his preference is Man United, and then we may get a drawn out saga where Man U start at 70 and Leipzig still say 85, which is why I don't think we can discount Newcastle, because they may not leave that race and they may say, we're the only ones that can meet your terms and can meet terms with Leipzig. So it's a fascinating situation that probably is going to have a few twists before the full picture is clear. And I would stress very clearly, Sesko is open at the moment to Man U or Newcastle, very different projects at very different phases. And that's what makes this one a relatively intriguing race, even though Newcastle fans will be fearing that Man U entering the race means the player's going to go to Manchester United. Maybe, but not definitely. With Oleksandr Isak, there are suggestions that I respect in Germany that say terms have been agreed. That's not my understanding. I'm told there has not been yet a formal negotiation between Isak and Liverpool on terms, because Liverpool are waiting for, one, Newcastle to find attacking reinforcements, and we may be talking plural. They may bring in 2 attackers before they genuinely accept that that Isak, I should say, is for sale. And then the second thing in all of this is that if Liverpool bid, they want to bid with confidence. They don't want to bid blind. They don't want to bid in grandstanding. They don't want to bid and have it drawn out. So they essentially want Newcastle United to say, now is the time when you can actually engage with us, because we will sell Isak. And at that point, I would expect Liverpool to go to Newcastle first, because they know terms with Isak are not a problem. So agreeing a contract with Isak is the least of Liverpool's worries. It may be the last step in this narrative, because Isak wants Liverpool. Liverpool can fit Isak into their wage structure. So don't worry too much about the player to club, because categorically Isak is waiting for Liverpool and those terms will be very easy to agree. This is about, are Liverpool going to place a formal bid? It's anticipated, but when is the right timing? And I'm not sure that's today, tomorrow. I think that will be after Newcastle United bring in a flagship attacker and maybe 2 attackers. And then Liverpool will be ready. They know it's going to take a British transfer record. So it's step by step. But I suspect if Liverpool place the bid tonight, they'd just get told not for sale until such time arises where the sale suits Newcastle. And I think that will only happen when Newcastle bring in an attacker, if not 2 attackers. So maybe Sesko, maybe Nicholas Jackson, maybe even Newcastle try an audacious bid for Ollie Watkins, very possibly Johan Wissa as well a bit later in the window. So it's step by step with Isak. But of course, all signs at the moment are pointing towards a Newcastle exit.
Wow. That would just be incredible, and Liverpool's window would be insane. I mean, nothing's guaranteed to work in football, Ben, but that is a pretty amazing window. I would say that we've had a great window too. Isak takes Liverpool way over the edge, I think, but who's to say that Gyokeres couldn't take us way over the edge? And just finish on this real quick. Our old player, Aaron Ramsdale's gone to Newcastle. One of our listeners was asking if it was for him to start or just be a backup. And is there anything else, leave us with this, that you see kind of shockingly happening before the window closes?
Not really. I mean, Xavi Simons' future with Chelsea pushing, Wissa leaving Brentford, like I said before, Isak going and probably coexisting with Hugo Ekitike, could be 4-4-2, or Ekitike could end up filling the Diaz void wide left. That's my kind of feeling, that Liverpool are not just moving out of surprise for Isak. I think in April, when they were having their summer recruitment meetings, they realised it could be Isak and Ekitike. So that will be factored into the football plan as well. I think we need to keep an eye on West Ham, because now they've got the kudos money. They're going to look to bring in a 6 and an 8. Lucas Paqueta could leave, and so could Edson Alvarez. So they'll be quite busy, in my opinion. Chelsea outgoings are going to be important. Manchester United and trying to add that striker and maybe going head to head. Well, definitely going head to head for Sesko with Newcastle United. So there's a few moving parts still. I think Tottenham aren't done in this window yet. They would still like another attacking midfielder or a right-sided attacker. They'll definitely want a number 6 as well, but I won't go into too much detail because we're obviously on an Arsenal podcast. So that's probably got people unsubscribing, but I do expect them to be relatively active as well. Villa are in a very interesting position because they want another attacker. They want a left-sided winger. Garnacho's future is going to be one to watch, probably within the Premier League for either Chelsea or Aston Villa. So there's lots that are still brewing, but I think if Arsenal get to the first game of the Premier League season against Man United and their window is done, then as much as people want more and more and more and always to keep adding, it'll be an indication that Berta's been decisive, that Berta has got the business done early, that Berta strengthened in several positions. And for me, you can't really ask for much more than your backup goalkeeper, who was once the world's most expensive goalkeeper and was playing week in, week out for Bournemouth in the Premier League for 5 million. That's pretty inspired to me, despite the fact that generally Arsenal fans don't like business from Chelsea. Mosquera, watch that development, because I'm told this is not just a future signing. Virtually everyone I've spoken to, even outside of Arsenal, thinks this guy is the real deal for now and is actually going to compete with Gabriel for minutes rather than just sit and develop and be a backup. So I think people are going to be the most surprised by Mosquera, because just watch how quickly he develops. And I actually think he'll get more minutes. I'm not saying every week starting, but I think he'll get a lot more minutes than people realize. Norgard is one of those that, like when Trossard joined, people are not that fussed about, but I think he'll have a very important squad role. Noni Madueke will surprise people, because if you look at the first 10, 15 games for Chelsea on the right, he was electric. He was one of the best players in that position in the Premier League. Go and watch the Wolves game away where he scored a hat-trick. That's what he's capable of. And again, if you avoid the price tag and avoid the Chelsea link and just look at somebody that can compete and be back up to Saka, that's a signing, I think, that's going to be very valuable as well. And obviously, Victor Gyokeres is going to be box office. And if he even replicates half the numbers at Sporting, that's going to be the number 9 that Arsenal craved. If you add Eze, icing on the cake, for me, that's pretty close, especially when you consider Berta's brand new, to a 10 out of 10 window. So I think if it was only Eze and then it all went quiet, Arsenal fans can still have a lot to look forward to ahead of the new season. It's really easy to kind of almost turn that "the king is dead, long live the king" into a transfer phrase and be like, we've signed somebody, who's next? We've signed another person, but what are we doing next? But there is a logic of just saying, we've done everything we need to do. Let's settle down. Let's just plan for pre-season and the new season, knowing that the window is effectively shut. We're done. And then whilst everyone else is frantically moving around for signings, Arsenal are just building chemistry, integrating their new signings and thinking we can relax. We don't have to worry about a deadline day, or we only need to focus on outgoings. And I think if they can get to that position by the first game of the Premier League season and maybe bring in Eze, everyone at Arsenal Football Club will be absolutely delighted.
What a brilliant closing. I don't think I need to add anything to that. And by the way, thank you so much for holding the fort. Talk about banging in the goal, Gyokeres style. Ben Jacobs is officially our number 1, number 9 here at Squad Central. So appreciate you. Thank you so much for hanging in there with the audio issue on my end. So professional, as our Chief Like Officer Tammy said. Please hit the like button on the way out, you guys. Ben has donated his time. He's a very busy man, and we're going to let him go now. Ben, thank you so much once again for joining us. We appreciate you. Squaddies, I'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock UK time with Pedro, aka LeGrove. Ben, thank you so much. Brilliant stuff from you. Keep smashing it, and we'll talk to you soon. At eSquaddies, don't forget to tell your loved ones you love them.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform. Please stand clear of the discussion doors. The next stop is Highbury Squad.